So I've got Leo's design here, and let me just make sure. Okay. Basically, the front and side view seem to line up. I've kind of checked them in Photoshop, and I basically cropped them out of here. So the reason I have a front and side view is that it's easier to load into ZBrush, and to load into ZBrush, you go to, usually I'll load some kind of mesh. It doesn't matter what it is, a sphere, whatever. Go to edit mode, and then we'll go to floor. So floor will show you, that's Shift P by the way is a shortcut. So it'll show you the kind of ground plane. And under draw is where we have options for that. So you can dock this. I usually dock it to the left side by left clicking and dragging that little kind of dot in the upper left corner. It allows you to drag that over to whatever side you want. I think by default it'll go to the right side, but I usually prefer the stuff on the left. So we've got the front back view. So it'll actually add another grid plane. I'll go to map, which brings up kind of like a quick importer, imports. And then I'll grab the front view that I have. And there you see it now, like so. Now what's great about this is that if you drag on a dot, you see the dot on your surface, or if we're going to symmetry, it'll actually map back to the reference image. And I also centered my crop so that it's fairly centered to the character. Now maybe the drawing isn't exactly centered or symmetrical. So you don't want to move the mesh. It's really not a great idea to move the mesh, because then if you look at your pivots, going back to the draw brush, you see that pivot is off center. So I can kind of mess things up a little bit, and if you go to set pivot, it'll kind of just snap you back to the center of the world. You can move forwards and backwards, because that's not really a pivot that we deal with too much for symmetry sculpting, right? It's usually kind of left to right. So that's why we want to usually keep our mesh in the center. So if you need to move your drawing, you can do horizontal offset like this. All right, so if you feel like you want to be more centered, you can do it that way. Yes, question. Yep. So I'll just set this to texture off. So basically you want to click on map 1, go to import. So that's under the draw menu. You have to click on draw. It's basically over here in the top menu. I just drag mine over to the side. But you can click on it here too. It's the same thing. So we go to map 1. So you have to expand. It's usually collapsed front to back. So you click on map 1, import, front. And then we'll do the same thing for the side. So if you go draw, left, right, click on map 1 and import, and we'll grab our side view like so. So again, usually when you're setting up initially, you don't want to be in perspective, because that skews how you're looking at the planes. And typically when you have a character turnaround that you've drawn, it's in a very flat, non-perspective view, right? So we usually want to sort of start our thing off in non-perspective, but as soon as I break away from the reference images, that's when I usually turn perspective on, just so you're aware. And like I said, if I need to nudge my drawings around, I usually will go to either the front, back. Usually I don't adjust the side view, because I can move the model forwards or backwards without affecting the left to right pivot. So you just want to tweak the horizontal offset. And you may want to tweak vertical as well. You can also do that, but in this case I don't need to. Additionally, there's something called the fill mode. So if you see this, 0 kind of turns off the image fill. 1 is a standard fill, kind of a semi-transparent image. 2 is a brighter image and a brighter looking mesh. And 3 is almost like an X-ray mode, which I usually prefer to kind of see through the volumes and figure out my shape. So that's the fill mode there. So next up, I want to start to maybe figure out the shape. So this is, it's not a, what's it called? It's not an editable mesh yet. It's not a poly mesh. So you could, let's say, replace this. I usually like to use actually the, you have to switch into the star, and then you can go down into what's called a Q cube or Q sphere. I'll probably go with Q sphere and increase the res a little bit. So maybe a 4 by 4 by 4. So you have to start with a star. It's a bit weird, right? But and you click on Q cube or Q sphere. So now you get a higher res sphere. Again, if I turn off the background there, you see kind of it's kind of higher res. There's no pinching points. I'm going to not solo this, but I'll turn the background back on. So what I'll probably do at first is, like I said, I can freely move forward, but I do not want to shift off the center. So I'm basically going to start to scale to try to get some initial proportioning. And we can also use the move brush as well. So I'll kind of rotate, maybe squash a little bit in this direction. Okay, so I'll probably just switch to a large move brush. And again, I want to make sure I'm in symmetry to start. And by the way, you can turn off the color fill if that's distracting, which I find it can be. And you can also turn off, I guess, polyframe. We don't necessarily need it on. So it's good to work with the large brush and something that's sort of cartoony like this. So we get that kind of bean shape, get the lower belly. Okay. I also have to account for that the helmet's probably going over the shoulders a bit. And by the way, you can divide this up a couple times. In this case, I usually like to use dynamic subdivision, so it's a preview. I'm not really sculpting anything yet. So what dynamic allows me to do is actually, technically I'm controlling the original low res, but seeing a smoother preview, just like in Maya. So you're actually moving very, very simple shapes around. Here, let's widen a bit here. Okay. So I think that looks okay. I'm probably going to bring the shoulders in a little bit. What's also great about dynamic is that you can apply it and make it have actual divisions for sculpting later on. So by having dynamic on too, I can also go to B for brush, I for insert, and then hit T. You want the full primitives. The second primitive option is half primitives. It has an H at the end for half. So you can click on insert primitive. So now I can maybe start to think about dropping in some shoulders. Let's say I'm on the right view here. All right, so I usually like to start with a sphere for shoulders, just to kind of get a sense of the joint. And then we can drag in maybe a cylinder. Oops. By the way, you have to make sure you're not in the Move Scale Rotate tool, because this is also a way in which you can switch between inserts. So if you have a multi-mesh insert like this, which has multiple meshes, you can actually quickly switch that out for a different one, which is a handy tool, but I actually want to keep the sphere there and basically drag out a new one. So you have to be in draw mode for that. So usually if you drag out, it kind of gives you this proportional sort of shorter cylinder, but if you then drag up, it allows you to kind of scale that inward a bit. So I'm going to kind of put this down. Now this thing should be more in a T pose, but I'll start with the reference basically in A pose here. And I'm going to show you a little trick to this. So okay, let's hit Shift F. I'll turn off the background for a second. So just to mention this, sometimes I will start splitting these tools up just to help me manage things and be able to rotate and change later. So I'll go to Split, Unmask. So whenever you do an insert, the last or the latest insert brush is usually unmasked while the rest of the mesh is masked. So I'll go to separate the arms here. And just to show you, like, for the longest time we were kind of stuck with this deformation panel where we could try to spherify things, right? So it can kind of warp shapes, but it's sort of doing it just in like a vague space, and we don't quite know, right, how it's going to react, and you have to sort of do trial and error to pivot, to change, so, and it's not necessarily easy to control. And I basically want to taper this, meaning like it gets thicker at the end, just like the design, right? So there's a really great tool for this. Let's go to, here, I'm going to turn off my dynamic subdiv for a minute and turn this off. If you click on the gear icon, so this is one of the reasons I separated this too, is that I knew I wanted to customize or edit just that cylinder. So I'm going to go to the gear icon. So if you're in the Move Scale Rotate tool, basically it's called the transpose gizmo, click on the gear and you now have some options here. So we can actually go and do a taper. Again, the interface kind of weird, like a lot of stuff in ZBrush, but if you click up on the top, it tapers this way. If you click on the bottom, it tapers this way. So it's actually very localized to the specific piece of mesh, right? So I can get that kind of flaring effect now, and you can flare, across the middle. I don't really need to do that. Let me just take a look. Yeah, so you can actually flare. I think his arms seem a bit wider from a side view. So this opacity slider kind of allows you to sort of change the directionality a little bit of that. Yeah, I don't want it that way. This way. Or this way, yeah, let's try that. Yeah, in this case, if I'm not quite getting the right direction that I want, I can always rotate the sphere after or tweak it some more. So once you're done with that, you can say accept. We also have things like deformer. So deformer is really great. Deformer soft is pretty good. This one is basically kind of like Maya's FFD, which is called a freeform deformer. Other software call it a lattice. So basically what happens is you can control click and drag over an area, and that leaves this zone masked. So you can now inflate this by scaling it, or if you usually I just kind of mask. Let's say I want to control this area, I'll kind of mask it first, and then flip it by control clicking off. It's just like a regular mask tool, and then I can sort of adjust this in the way that I'd like, right? So I can scale this or flatten it. So you can get additional kind of shaping options this way, which is nice. Okay, I'm going to just hit accept. I do think I want to rotate along the pivot here just to get it sitting the right way. So again, we have some other options like bend. So I'm going to go to bend. I'll try bend curve. Let's see what that does here. And by the way, there's usually additional points. So again, kind of hard to read. It's something I wish this interface would get fixed. So you can squeeze again. Yeah, I'm not sure this is the one I want. Let's see if I, yeah, go to smooth. Curve resolution. So you can have additional points. So what that means is now if I have this extra point and I grab this, I can now curve. Pretty cool, yeah? So now I get that kind of really appealing shape. Now, I will say this, though, that I probably don't want the arm curved like this simply because it's going to be in T-pose. If you want anything, you want to bend at the elbow. You don't want the arm bending on any other plane because it's kind of unnatural. So I think I'll leave it sort of straight for now. Again, I can just hit accept or delete. In this case, it'll just delete the last. And I'll just hit accept because, yeah. Let me just see from the side. So, you know, maybe the shape's not quite there, and that's okay. I'm going to just use my move brush. So I think that'll kind of help me go the rest of the way. Oops, what's move doing now? Let's just get rid of the draw mode here. I'm going to just make sure my brush is okay. Sometimes you'll have to hit reset all brushes to adjust for some weirdness here. Okay, so yeah, so I can, you know, also just manually edit as well. That's never a bad thing, really. So it's kind of an old school way to do it, but totally valid. It works great. Yeah, for the shoulder, I'll switch back to this and just, again, using the move brush, kind of warp it into position. Okay. And for these, like I said, I can kind of just rotate from a front view, more or less, to sort of get a sense of that shape. Okay. So that's kind of the process, is to really kind of keep running through using simple shapes. In this case, even if you had a more elaborate character, you can start with a human mesh and just scale its proportions. Yes, question?
Is the shoulder welded to the arm?
No, so that's a good question. Let me just show you that. I'll turn off the floor again. So these are just floating parts right now. I eventually will Dynamesh this together because I'm going to want to meld it together, make it a solid surface. For your films too, if you have layers of clothing, you may want to simplify that. So if the character has like a tank top on and then a collared shirt, you might want to make like the tank top and even the collared shirt almost like one solid shell, that, you know, and then the head and neck can kind of be floating over top. We don't usually want too many layers of clothing because it's hard to skin all those separate layers and not have them pop through each other during animation. It's possible, but it can take a lot of extra correction and a lot of extra work, which you probably don't have time for next year. The other thing is with multi layers of clothing and little, like, you know, pockets, like excessive pockets and things like that, it's hard to get them to deform right. And Again, it's fine in a bigger production when you have like a team around you to help with these things, but a little more tough when it's just you or you and another person or two other people on a short film. So yeah, just keep that in mind. I think, yeah, you'll want to kind of keep stuff relatively streamlined and simple. So yeah, basically because his spacesuit is, it almost to me looks like one piece, like even the boots, or they almost look like slippers, funny from the front. But yeah, all this I would keep as one shell, and then yeah, I think everything through the head actually could be one complete shape, or a lot of times you separate the head and neck from the body because when we do blend shapes, we don't want to have to load the entire mesh in for each blend shape. It actually saves a bit on memory and makes things a little more efficient. Okay, so we'll move on to legs and gloves. Now for that, I can literally probably just, in this case, clone the, the arms. Again, I'll probably just go, because I like to manage these things with a bit more control in case I need to do other edits. So I'm going to, oops, make sure I'm on the legs. I've just basically split the legs off from the arms. And again, I'm just going to kind of just go with a very large, soft move brush. So again, you want overlap so that this fits the, it's going to basically Dynamesh nicely into the model. So yeah, looking from the back here. And, you know, we're getting a pretty good kind of representation, I think, of the character pretty early on, right? Yeah, question?
So if the character has clothes, well, obviously all have clothes, but like, do you basically model the body and then the clothes?
No, I would say like, again, it just depends on the nature of the character. So you want to kind of think of it as there not being a body under the clothes in most cases. So if there's a character with like pants and a shirt, you would model like the pants and shirt roughly together as a shell. In the high res, you can keep them separate, but eventually we'd Dynamesh that together, I think. And then for the arm, it would be overlapping the, let's say, the sleeve. And let's say you can see some ankle and then a shoe. The ankle and shoe would be together and just overlapping the pants. So if I can, unfortunately I don't have, I'm doing this all via mouse right now, which is kind of whatever, not the greatest, but I'll show you what I mean by that. So let's do a little drawing of it. Okay, yeah, fine. So yeah, the idea basically is that, oops. Right, let's say you've got pants, right? So then the mesh would have a little like extrusion, maybe a little thickness, and then a shell. And then your leg mesh would just overlap that, just like a sleeve too, right? It's the best I could do with the mouse, sorry. Yeah, so there'd be a bit of overlap. Sometimes you can even keep them connected if it's just like a small cuff or a small, like if the more form-fitting, the more you can keep things a solid shell, which makes skinning and rigging easier, yeah.
So, the character has a floor-length dress, so the legs are completely covered.
Yeah, so if there's a dress, if you don't even see the feet, you can literally have no feet underneath.
But wouldn't it cause problems for the rigging because of
No, you just have leg bones, okay? Boop, boop, boop. And then there'd just be skinning influence. That sort of split, roughly. Now, there might be some weird stretching and warping, of course. But usually with a bit of paint weights, you can kind of fix that or make it flow okay. So that's not a problem. If the skirt's a bit higher, then again, you can kind of have the legs kind of come down. Like so. Terrible mouse drawing. Yeah, so the same thing. It's basically like with sleeves. It's literally just that, right? Except you got... Yeah, art. So yeah, that's that's kind of how it works, right? And like I said, if it's more form fitting, meaning that it's like, you know, fitted shirt, fitted pants, then you can kind of just make it like a small change, like that, you know.
They change the technique.
Okay.
Should be installed in background.
Okay.
For all four lamps.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. So yeah, that's kind of that. So. Yeah, like for me, I feel like I would maybe in the beginning model these things separately because it's easier to manage. Like I have a hand that basically works. By the way, like I said, if you're looking from a top view, let's say this is the body. What am I in here? Yeah, so let's say this is the body from above and the head. The arms in a T-pose, so right, the T-pose is just like this. Okay. So the arms should not be straight, but they should be slightly bent. The reason is when you set up the bones and the IK that drives it, it's going to only bend along one plane, meaning that the forearm and the upper and lower arm will be in line, and all the rotation will happen at the shoulder joint, right, at the shoulder here. So we want a slight bend in the elbows, and from the front view, right, they'll look kind of straight, or let's say this is our hips. The legs will be roughly shoulder width. They can be straight or slightly widened, but from a side view, they should have a slight bend. So yes, we can stick to the reference for now for kind of laying this out, but then we want to put slight bends because that's going to allow the bone chain, the IK chain that drives the bones to calculate things properly. So yeah, sometimes characters will be kind of bow-legged. If possible, you'll have to try to get a straight bone system through that kind of curved mesh. It's getting messy in here. But what I suggest is actually you kind of just keep the legs straight, and then when you animate, you pivot this out, right? You can kind of twist the knees out or have the knees point out to get that bow-legged effect. So then it'll kind of do this, right? Again, because of the mathematics and the complications of it all, it can be really kind of dicey. So I'm going to load my tool. I do have a generic hand mesh. I was just thinking about this too. Where is the hand? Just got to find the thing. Okay. Yes, so I might have to download it from online here. Yeah, I think I just need to add a little, what's it called? Hand mesh. So this is one I use a lot. It's already got kind of polygroups, which is easy for reposing. But yeah, I think I should have a layer where it goes into like totally flat mode. So it's, again, it's good to have things kind of flatten on a plane, so it's easy to like duplicate the fingers and then get them to, the fingers will basically have almost like FK rotation usually, and then it'll be kind of one bone's connected to the next. So when you rotate the base bone or have a slider, it'll drive the whole finger chain to kind of curl. Okay, so go to downloads. Where is the window? Yeah, there. Cancel that. So I'll show you that hand tool. Let's just turn this off. Floor. So that's the hand. Like I said, it wouldn't take too much to flatten it, but that's the basics of it. So it's got roughly joints for each kind of rotational pivot point. But yeah, I think I'd want to tweak it a little bit, but for this case, I can just slap it on and adjust later. A little kind of trick to show you this is that under deformation, this is where this works good, is that if you want a more slender, so we can just divide it up to see what it looks like, right? If you want a more slender, it's kind of generic, kind of male, but if you want it a little more feminine, deflate. If you want it more cartoony, inflate. And there's your glove for the character. Mr. Hamburger Helper. So I think, I can't remember if I have it as a brush. I think it's just a Z tool, but let's say you stare at it from a front view, you can go to B for brush. So what this means is that when you're creating an insert mesh, which is a mesh you can drag onto other mesh, right? You want to imagine the pivot point being the furthest point away from your view. So anyways, you'll see what I mean in a second. If I hit B for brush, create insert mesh, new. Jump over to here. I'll alt click on the arms to get into that view. Let's turn on the, okay, so then when I left click and drag, you see they're kind of coming out that way. Okay, so bring them up. Again, it's helpful when they're more spread too and not close together, because if I Dynamesh this stuff, it'll get a little messy. And knowing that Dynamesh does get messy, I'll probably just keep the hands separate, and it's got clean mesh basically already. Yeah, let's just, am I in perspective? Yes, I am, which I don't want. So I'm going to just turn that off and slide this over and go to inflate. Not bad, right? Works out pretty decent, I think. It's pretty close. I think I need to make it a little bit shorter and maybe a little bit thicker this way. And this was an insert, right? Meaning it's kind of in the same subtool as the arms, and the arms are currently masked, which you can also see in the little thumbnail view. So you can actually go to split unmasked points. Again, so I can maybe just solo this and, oops, solo on the wrong thing here. So I can kind of focus on, right, just reshaping a little more. So I definitely want this to be a bit wider. Maybe a lot thicker here. Now you could sculpt it from scratch too, so you'd basically start with like a very simple sphere and then maybe a couple of cylinders for each digit and smooth out the ends and Dynamesh all that together. So again, good thing we can do this. The floor can be really distracting at times too, so we can actually just kind of hide off some of the other, yeah, I think I'll just hide off these parts because I think I just want the thumb to look a little more like it's straight out there, and we can, yeah, always smooth a bit or tweak as we go. Move and then back to inflate. You can do custom inflate, right? Just on the area. So just smoothing and then reinflating essentially. Of course, we can also move as well. So yeah, it's another thing where it's like, chunky, chubby shapes can be a little more challenging to execute, so keep that in mind. So yeah, again, I just want to kind of get the thickness right around. And we can hit, if you hit D for divide, it'll actually ask you if you're not hitting Control D, which is sculpting divisions, if you want to do the automatic subdivision, dynamic subdivision, I should say. So I'll say yes, because that's just going to give me a preview, yet I'm still kind of moving just the low poly stuff. So again, I use a combination of like Alt and move, because that moves the polys out in the direction they're already facing, and Shift to smooth back again. Again, you can always like hit a little Shift and soften it and tweak that, right? So that's totally fine. Okay, back to the floor. Okay, so for the, yeah, let's just move this back with inflate. For that little cuff, I'll show you a really, really easy method for this. So let's go to solo for a second again, and I'll turn off the floor. Okay, so in this case, I might want some actual sculpting divisions. So I just want to make sure this is kind of shaped well before I get into this, because the underlying shape will affect this. So yes, let's, I've got a topology brush. So what's great about this is that if I left click and drag across here, oops, because this is really, really simple stylized mesh, I'm going to just left click and drag across here, do the same thing here, and then as long as I basically come across and start creating quad patches, it will create essentially a quad type topology for that strap, for example, right? Now, what's cool about this is that your brush thickness or brush size, if I hit S and click elsewhere on the model, it'll give me a mesh of that thickness. Cool, yeah? If I go a little bit thinner, because I know that thing has a bit of a thickness, or I assume it has a bit of a thickness, I can left click with a smaller. And if you want just a simple flat plane, you can go all the way down to draw size 1, and it just makes very, very thin mesh, which we can see if I turn on double-sided here, okay? So I'll give it a little thickness. Yeah, a little more. I think that's good. So again, this was, it's almost like an insert because I dragged it on top, drew it on top there. I'll go to, again, I'll just for now keep it a separate piece. Split on mask points. I'll go over here, get out of solo, turn off that smoothing. So what I want to do to create kind of sharpness at the ends here is I can either crease, sorry, let's just solo this. I can either crease the ends or add additional loops. I usually do loops just because it's a little more clean that way, I would say. So, sorry, let me just turn up the dynamic subdiv. So go to, yes, ZModeler. And by default, it's on insert loop. So if I left click and drag and go right to the edge there, or very, very close, and if I hit, sorry, let's try that again. I'll show you with that preview on. If I go really close to the edge, you see it sharpens that up. Same thing over here, left click and drag with insert loop. And then I'll do the same thing across, oops, this direction here. And it'll just kind of help sharpen the corners a little bit. Right, very appealing. Get out of solo. Now, I will say this, it's actually easier to deal with mesh that doesn't have a thickness. So I'll show you what I mean. If I have solo, whoop, I don't want expose, or expose. If I undo back here, right, when I had this thing, if I went to, I'll show you a really neat trick this, if I click and make a thin mesh, I'll go to split unmasked points again. So what I mean is I've got this flat plane now, right? In dynamic subdivision, and this is great for clothing too, not just little accessories. In dynamic subdivision, there is a thickness preview. So technically, I'm still only working with a thin mesh, but it's previewing it with a thickness. And it's much easier to control clothing or these thin kind of pieces when they're technically a plane. It's technically a plane, right? So if I went back to ZModeler, oops, mine's, no, yeah, ZModeler. So again, this thing has the preview thickness. So I'm actually technically only editing. I'll show you this without the thing on here. So left click and drag, right, just add those loops the same way, but I'm only doing it on a flat plane. And it's literally just kind of giving me an extrusion in preview. You see? So that can actually be a lot easier to manage in the end. Because if I need to like change a shape for whatever reason, because the glove changed shape, and it's hard for me to match the thickness of this piece, technically I can just go to the thin part and say, okay, well, I'm going to just move just that, just this, just that, right? So it's really very, very handy and very useful to be able to do that. So I think I'll delete this one and go with the other one. Right, so like I said, I'm looking at this piece, oh, it's like poking through here, there. I can kind of just turn off dynamic or have dynamic on, and actually I'm just going to use the move tool, and I'm actually only moving like individual points, but then the thickness is like in preview, so it's not, right, it's not wrecking anything. So I can get a much nicer placement, right? All good? Does that make sense? Sweet. So yeah, let's say for these gloves, I'm going to solo the gloves. Again, because I'm in dynamic, I can just go to, like, let's say mesh editing, close holes. And let me, again, solo for a sec and turn on the floor. Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's any additional cuff there, which is fine, but I'll show you kind of alternatives to this. So yeah, let's just turn off the smoothing for a second. So if I, again, I'm going to go to BZM, which is kind of the shortcut chain for ZModeler. If you hover over a polygon, you can go to Alt and then maybe do like Inset Polygroup All. And that allows you to get, again, a little extra edge there. I wouldn't worry too much about like perfectly clean topology or anything like that. Like that can be remeshed later on. Yeah, it's a little messy, but yeah, the other thing is I could maybe, let's see. Yeah, let's go back to this. I could also just insert an edge loop below. And I think, I can't remember, yeah, there's some options here for inset polys there. I think that's what I kind of wanted, but I always forget. Yeah, if you hover over space, basically it's like, what's your target? So in this case, or what's the action? I want to inset, meaning I want to almost do like a flat extrusion. And then you can sort of pick polygroup inner, polygroup all. I'm going to try polygroup inner, and then you can do center and border, individual polys. In this case, I want to try to do maybe the border only. Let's see if that, yeah, it's not quite working. Polygroup all, let's see. Yeah, I feel like it's giving me some kind of broken mesh there, but anyways, the extra loop I've added here, when I do the subdiv, you see it sort of sharpens that glove up, right? If I wanted to do a collar, like a cuff, I should say, in this case, I would just go to extrude, again, polygroup all, extrude this out, and then do it one more time to get the sharpness, and then if we take this and extrude it out this way once, and then a second time just to kind of get that sharpening effect, right? That's what we get for the collar. So if you had to do something like that, that's kind of the approach, okay? I think that might look a little better anyways for this particular character. I think I'm going to just adjust that cuff. So you don't have to be religious and stick to the style guide, or I should say the turnaround, like that rigidly. You can update and adapt and improve the design, okay? Okay, let's get out of perspective, or sorry, get the floor back on. Okay, so the knee thing, I would do roughly the same thing. I would kind of trace out. You can also do inserts too. There's nothing wrong with just going B for brush, right? I for insert, T for the primitives, and just like, you know, grabbing a cube and shaping it. You can also Dynamesh these individual pieces and remesh them. I would do insert cylinder for this piece, sphere for the feet, flatten and chop, right? So I'll just show that quickly. So I'll focus on the legs for now and just click and drag out a cylinder. And I'll just scale those. Yeah, sometimes too it can be awkward dealing with this kind of brush here, or the move tool, but I'm just hitting smooth, but you know, I'm not crazy with those results, so I'll just go back into the gear there and do a taper again. So just grab that and taper that. It's in the move tool, so I'm going to hit accept. So when you hit W, E, or R, there's a gear icon on the far left of that bar. Okay. Now, like I said, for the feet, I'll go again, probably just to IMM brush here, sphere, drag it out. So you can actually start and kind of work with just spheres, really, for a lot of stuff, you know. It's actually, you know, what it always reminds me of is basically like construction drawing kind of methods, right? Spheres, cylinders, you know, we do a lot of this in, oops, why can't I reset that for some reason? Anyways, I'll just roughly rotate this. Yeah, normally I should be able to reset this. For some reason I'm not able to. Oh, there we go. So weird. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to just scale this out and then kind of manually reshape it. So, yeah, let's just use a move brush. And I'll flip the masking around, and these should all have separate polygroups too, so you can kind of easily manipulate this stuff as well. Check it from the front. And I'll use this view on this side as my reference point, I guess. So And by the way, you can also go to move topological, which is 8 on my keyboard. So that will actually grab just that polygroup without affecting the other one too much. I probably should have just done another cylinder for, let's hide that off. Yeah, for this region here coming down, but that's okay. So yeah, just grabbing with the move brush, checking front to side. Yeah, I think I need more of the inside to be high. Pull this wider. So you can even kind of introduce more like organic kind of shaping here too, right? And then I'll go to, what's it called? Probably just trim in this case because it'll slice everything off. Let's just make sure nothing is masked. I don't think there's anything masked. Trim this off really below that kind of, yeah, I don't know if I want trim or slice. I'll try slice. Let's see. Hide those off. Yeah, that's okay. I'll just hide that stuff off there and hit delete hidden. The back of the heel is really hurting, so I'm going to just go in and make sure that shape is good. Again, I probably should have just done a single sphere for that back of the heel there. That's okay. Nothing that can't be fixed, really. Okay. Okay, so I think I deleted my pant legs. That's okay. You can always go back in history and grab it or save this as another version, but I'll show you this just quickly with the Dynamesh and how I clean this up. So I'll go to Dynamesh just to merge it all together. Okay. Dynamesh, a little higher res. So again, you don't always have the most appealing shape right away, but we can always, like I said, just keep it fairly light and simple, and we can tweak these things very quickly. Okay, and we should still have our polygroup there. So I'll just go ZRemesh, keep groups, go in half here. And it's smoothing as we go, so I'm gonna get it really, really low. I don't want a ton of mesh to deal with, really. So I'm just gonna pull out this part a little more. There. ZRemesh. Okay. So. Turn our floor back on. All right, so it's a lot easier, like I said, to now kind of sculpt and tweak these shapes a bit. You know, if I still need to go in and refine things, I've got the ability to do that fairly easily. The mesh is much more kind of geared towards the actual shape. This is still not necessarily production ready, but it's a way for me to get a feel for what's happening. And then, of course, with the shoe, let's turn off the floor again. This has one giant polygroup. So when I did the slice and did a fill, it does a polygroup. So that way if I go to ZModeler, extrude all, may not do, let me just see, extrude all. Another trick I'll show you, because I want to just kind of almost pull it straight down. So I'm going to control click on this group, which isolates it. And if you hold control and drag with that masked, you'll actually get an extrusion. It's literally creating like more mesh. But yeah, I'm going to try, let's just try the ZModeler approach again. Extrude all. Yeah, let's try that. Oops. So one thing that's nice about that is that it kind of creates a side polygroup. So again, I can select this. I'm going to center it and scale it flat. Oops. scale it flat. There we go. And then back to ZModeler, I can extrude just this loop here, which gives us that kind of thickness around the object. Okay. So again, I can sort of isolate by polygroup here. Okay, I'm going to just auto group these so that the top and bottom rim there have their own group. Let's just go in here, auto group. Okay, so then if I just hide that for a sec, I can hide this, center this, scale it flat. Right? We now get a better sense of the boot that way. And I can do the same thing with these other loops here, these other groups. Okay, sorry, just hide that off. Center, scale flat. Okay. Yeah, it looks like I've kind of done one but not the other. Well, that's okay. I can just probably just do a mirror and weld, and that will flip that over. So now if you see this, let's say divided, right? You see it's a little wishy-washy, but all right, because of all these polygroups, you can actually try to go to, what's it called? I'll go to crease, maybe at just like level 1 or level 2. I'll say crease PG, crease polygroup. And now it looks sharp at those edges, right? So again, really, really useful to kind of be able to visualize something really cartoony. Okay, let's go to the floor. All right, we'll stop there for now, and we can pick it up maybe after a little break.